Welcome, weary traveler. You've left the noise of the world behind and stepped into a realm untouched by time. Here, candlelight dances upon ancient stone walls, and the air carries the soft hum of forgotten lullabies. Beyond these gates, the night is gentle, and every story is a silver thread, weaving warmth around your heart. So rest your mind. Let each word be a quiet step into the halls of dreams until sleep, tender and deep, finds you. You are safe here, and the world drifts away. Chapter 1. A Quiet Beginning. The kingdom of Everendale was not like others you may have heard about in grand tales of knights and kings. It was not a place of battles, or restless riders charging across fields, or banners clashing against one another. Everendale was gentler. It seemed to breathe in long, slow rhythms, as though the hills and the rivers themselves lived by a softer heartbeat. The meadows stretched wide and low, filled with grass that swayed in waves beneath the wind, and the trees seemed always to whisper kindly to one another as their leaves stirred in the air. The sky above the kingdom was broad and pale by day, turning into deep velvet by night, and when the stars came out, they glimmered as though each one leaned a little closer to the earth, watching with quiet tenderness. At the very heart of this calm land stood a castle unlike any other. Its towers rose gracefully, their pale stone catching the moonlight as if each block had been carved from silver. The villagers who lived nearby often looked up at the castle with a sense of quiet wonder, for they believed it had not been built over years with tools and sweat, but had instead appeared all at once, born in a single night. Some said the stars themselves had descended, placing stone upon stone until the walls stood tall and whole. Others whispered that the castle had bloomed from the earth like a flower, rising fully formed beneath the cover of darkness. No matter the story told, there was one truth they all agreed upon. The castle was not built for war or defense. It was a home, a sanctuary, a place meant only for rest. Inside those gentle walls lived Lady Phaedra. She was not the kind of noble who ruled with commands or stood above her people. Rather, she was a keeper of quiet spaces. She had long dark hair that flowed like a curtain down her shoulders, and her eyes were steady and calm, like lanterns burning softly through a mist. Phaedra kept her castle doors open to all who came, travelers from distant villages, weary shepherds who had walked too far, even children who had strayed while playing in the fields. To each of them, she offered a warm fire, a loaf of bread, and a smile that carried no weight of expectation. On evenings such as this one, when the sky was painted in the silver blue of twilight and the moon lingered low over the hills, Phaedra liked to sit near the tall windows of her great hall. She would rest a candle upon the sill and lean forward to watch the night unfold. The castle, though grand, never felt empty to her. Its walls hummed with a kind of warmth, as if they remembered all the laughter, all the whispers, and all the long silences that had settled gently within them. Tonight, as the moon rose higher, Phaedra's heart was at ease. She knew her friends would soon come to join her. In a small cottage nestled at the edge of the forest lived Bathilda, a woman of great age and great calm. Her silver hair caught the light like threads of frost, and her hands always smelled faintly of herbs and wildflowers. Bathilda was known throughout the land as a maker of soothing remedies. She gathered chamomile blossoms from the meadows, lavender from the hedges, mint from the cool shade of the brook, and tied them with gentle care. When villagers knocked on her door, she did not rush them away with potions or cures. Instead, she invited them to sit, to breathe, to rest for a while. They often said that stepping into Bathilda's cottage felt like entering a lullaby, and wandering the quiet paths between forest and field, between cottage and castle, was Sir Zephyr. He was a knight, though not of the usual kind. His armor shone with careful polish, but it bore no scars of combat. His sword was rarely unsheathed, except to catch the glimmer of the sun when he cleaned it. Zephyr was known not for conquest, but for presence. He walked slowly through the kingdom, often accompanied by children eager to hear his gentle tales. When he spoke, his words moved like slow streams over stones, each one soft and clear, each one carrying the listener deeper into calm. On this night, Zephyr walked alone, his boots pressing softly into the grass as the moonlight trailed over him. The wind was cool and carried the faint fragrance of lavender fields nearby. He followed the path that curved gently toward the castle, his pace unhurried, his heart steady. The sound of the river at his side was no more than a murmur, a soft rhythm that seemed to guide his steps. In the distance, he could already see the glow of lanterns within the castle windows, shining like stars gathered close together. Bathilda, too, had set out from her cottage, carrying a small basket tucked against her arm. Inside it, bundles of dried herbs rested, tied with ribbons of blue and gold. She knew Phaedra liked to steep them in hot water, filling the halls with the scent of mint and flowers. Bathilda's walk was slow, each step deliberate, as though she was listening to the earth beneath her feet. Her breath was steady, her shoulders loose, her mind as calm as the evening sky. And so it was that, on this tranquil night, three figures moved toward one another. Phaedra waiting by her fire, Zephyr walking beneath the moon, and Bathilda carrying her fragrant basket. The castle, glowing softly in the center of Evandale, awaited their gathering. The night deepened gently. Stars stretched across the velvet sky like scattered pearls, and the moon shone low and watchful. The fields lay quiet, touched by silver light. The river moved slowly, its waters reflecting the sky above. All around, the air carried a softness that hushed the heart, a promise that within these walls and meadows, no harm, no haste, no harshness would disturb the peace. And as the three friends came nearer to one another, it felt as though the world itself leaned in, listening, pausing, breathing in time with them. The castle stood ready, its pale stones gleaming with quiet welcome. Tonight would be a night not of urgency, but of rest, of stories told softly, of warmth shared by the fire. The beginning of a long, peaceful tale had come, as gently as a candle flame, as softly as a dream just beginning to unfold. Chapter 2, The Night's Walk. The path that wound through Evandale was neither hurried nor straight. It curved like a gentle ribbon, weaving through meadows that sighed with long grass and beside brooks that sparkled faintly beneath the moonlight. This was the road Sir Zephyr often chose for his evening walks, for it led him unhurriedly toward the castle, and along the way he could greet the quiet world as if it were a familiar friend. Zephyr was a knight, but not of battles or of harsh commands. His armor, though polished, bore no dents or scars, and when he walked, he carried himself not with rigid pride, but with a looseness that came from trust in the peace around him. The people of Evandale often remarked that Zephyr seemed to walk as though the world were in no hurry to unfold, as though the sky itself bent lower to listen to the rhythm of his steps. This evening, As the sun had long since settled behind the hills and the stars had taken their places, Zephyr stepped out upon the road. The air was cool but not sharp, carrying the scents of lavender fields and the faint sweetness of ripened apples from an orchard nearby. His boots pressed softly into the grass where the path grew narrow, and every step seemed to make a gentle sound, more a whisper than a thud, blending with the rustle of leaves and the hush of distant waters. Zephyr liked to walk alone in such hours, but he never felt lonely. The kingdom itself seemed alive with presence, the tall oaks leaning toward one another as if whispering secrets, the wind slipping through the reeds with songs too delicate for words, the fireflies lifting like golden sparks from the hedges. Every detail felt like a companion. Sometimes Zephyr would pause simply to listen. He stopped by the brook that curved near the path, kneeling to watch the moon shimmer across its ripples. The water slid smoothly over stones, the sound steady and endless, like a lullaby that had begun long before him and would continue long after. He touched the surface with his gloved hand, feeling the chill that came not to startle, but to remind him that life moved gently onward, steady and sure. Rising again, he looked toward the castle in the distance. Its pale towers glowed with lantern light, warm against the deep blue of the sky. From where he stood, it looked less like stone and more like a beacon, something grown from dream or memory rather than earth. Zephyr's heart warmed at the sight. He knew that Lady Phaedra would be waiting within, perhaps near the fire, her calm presence filling the hall. And he knew that Bathilda too would soon arrive, bringing her herbs and her gentle wisdom. Yet there was no hurry in his step. He continued slowly, as if savoring each moment the night offered him. His eyes traced the constellations overhead, the same patterns he had studied since boyhood. He whispered their names to himself, not loudly, but softly enough that the sound seemed to stay within his breath. He pointed toward Orion's belt, the Pleiades cluster, and the bright North Star that guided travelers. To Zephyr, the stars were not distant fires, but companions, watching kindly from above. Further along the path, a group of deer lifted their heads from the meadow. Their ears twitched, catching the faint sound of his boots, but they did not run. They simply watched him, their dark eyes wide and gentle. Zephyr slowed his steps further, nodding to them as though greeting old friends. The deer returned to grazing, their movements unhurried, their bodies swaying softly like shadows in the moonlight. The night smiled faintly. Encounters such as these reminded him why he preferred the life he lived. Not one of rushing to battle, but one of listening, noticing, walking slowly enough to feel the rhythm of the land itself. When he reached the low stone wall that marked the orchard, he stopped again. The apples, though faintly visible in the dark, gave off a sweet fragrance that mingled with the cool air. Reaching over, Zephyr plucked one from a low branch. He polished it gently on his cloak and took a bite. The taste was crisp, carrying both sharpness and sweetness, a perfect balance that seemed to echo the night itself. He ate slowly, watching as the moon drifted higher, its silver glow touching the orchard, the meadow, the brook, and even the faraway towers of the castle. The road stretched on, but never did it feel long. Time in Evandale seemed to move at a softer pace, where even a simple walk could last an hour without ever weighing heavily on the mind. Zephyr continued, finishing the apple, tossing the core into the grass where foxes or birds might find it later. His boots carried him past wildflowers that brushed his ankles, their petals still faintly open beneath the starlight. At one bend in the path, he paused to look behind him. The forest edge where Bathilda's cottage stood was barely visible, but he imagined her already walking toward the castle, basket in hand, her pace just as steady and calm as his own. The thought comforted him. He did not need to see her to feel her presence moving quietly across the land. Ahead, The castle loomed closer, though it did not rise sharply like a fortress. Instead, it seemed to lift gently, like a mountain softened by mist, its towers less like spears and more like lanterns. The banners that hung from the turrets stirred lightly in the wind, their cloth flowing like waves upon the sea. To Zephyr, the sight always brought a sense of homecoming. He had wandered through many lands, yet no other place felt so safe, so accepting, so deeply at peace. As he drew near, the sounds of the castle reached him, not loud or busy, but subtle and tender. The faint creak of a wooden shutter, the distant bleat of a sheep grazing near its walls, the muffled crackle of fire echoing from within. These were not the sounds of preparation for battle, but of rest, of comfort, of lives lived gently beneath the stars. Zephyr slowed further as he approached the gates. The guards recognized him, of course, but they did not call out or raise their spears. They simply nodded, their expressions calm, their movements unhurried. In Evandale, even those who watched the gates carried themselves with quiet patience, as though knowing the land they guarded was blessed with peace. Before stepping inside, Zephyr paused once more, lifting his gaze to the night sky. The moon hung high now, bathing the towers in silver. He drew a long breath, filling his lungs with cool air, and let it out slowly, steadily, feeling his heart settle deeper into calm. And then, without urgency, he walked through the gates, the warmth of lantern light spilling gently across his path. The night's walk was complete, not as a journey from one place to another, but as an act of living fully within the peace of the world. The castle awaited him, and within its walls, the promise of firelight, companionship, and rest. Chapter 3, The Wise Woman. On the edge of Evandale's quiet wood, where the trees grew tall but never dark, there stood a small stone cottage. Its walls were covered with ivy, its roof shingled in weathered wood, and its windows glowed with the soft light of a single candle. This was the home of Bathilda, the Wise Woman. Bathilda was known across the kingdom not only for her knowledge of herbs and remedies, but for the peaceful way she carried herself. Wherever she went, calm seemed to follow, like ripples spreading gently across a pond. Her silver hair, gathered in a neat braid, shimmered faintly in moonlight, and her eyes held the steady patience of one who had lived many seasons. She spoke little, and when she did, her voice was soft, as though the words had been smoothed by the wind before they ever reached another's ear. Her cottage was simple, yet it held a kind of magic, not the kind of spells and sparks spoken of in tales, but the quiet enchantment of care. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the beams, releasing faint perfumes into the air. Chamomile with its sweet golden scent, lavender with its calming softness, mint with its cool sharpness, all mingled together into a fragrance that seemed to settle directly into the heart. The shelves were lined with clay jars, each carefully labeled in Bathilda's neat hand, holding remedies for aches, teas for rest, and balms for weary muscles. This evening, Bathilda prepared a basket to take with her on her walk to the castle. She had promised Lady Phaedra that she would bring fresh herbs for tea, for Phaedra loved to steep fragrant blends to share with her guests. Bathilda moved slowly, her hands steady as she tied together sprigs of mint and lavender with ribbons of soft blue. She added chamomile flowers, their tiny golden heads glowing faintly in the candlelight. Into the basket she placed also a small pouch of rosemary, for its grounding scent and a bundle of sage, which she often burned in the hearth to calm the mind. She paused for a moment by the window. Outside, the forest edge lay bathed in moonlight, and the gentle call of a nightingale floated through the air. The bird's song was not loud, but thin and delicate, weaving easily into the silence. Bathilda closed her eyes and listened, letting the sound pass through her like a breeze. She breathed in deeply, then out, feeling her body lighten with the rhythm. When the song faded, she lifted her basket and stepped outside. The cool air greeted her kindly, brushing against her cheeks and stirring the edges of her cloak. She pulled the fabric closer around her shoulders, not from chill but for comfort, the way one might wrap themselves in a blanket. Her boots pressed softly upon the earth, each step falling in slow rhythm with her breath. The path from her cottage to the castle was one she knew well. It curved through the meadow, where wildflowers still opened faintly under the moon, and then wound gently upward toward the lantern-lit towers. Bathilda walked with no haste. She allowed herself to notice everything. The hush of the grass bending beneath the breeze, the faint glitter of dew beginning to settle, the silver gleam of stars above. Every detail felt like part of a lullaby meant for those who walked slowly enough to hear it. Halfway along, she paused by a fallen log. From its damp wood, tiny mushrooms glowed faintly white, catching the moonlight on their smooth caps. Bathilda smiled, crouching to touch one gently with her fingertip. She did not pluck them, for she believed that some things were best left simply to be admired. She whispered a small blessing, words not meant to call upon spirits or magic, but words of gratitude to the earth for its endless gifts. Rising again, she continued on her way. The basket swayed lightly at her side, releasing small waves of fragrance into the air with each step. Mint, lavender, chamomile, all blended with the night breeze, making the path itself smell like a soft brew of tea. She imagined the moment ahead, sitting with Phaedra and Zephyr by the fire, pouring steaming cups, the warmth filling their hands, the herbs calming their hearts. The thought made her smile, though her lips only curved faintly. As she walked, she thought of Phaedra. The noblewoman's calm presence had always comforted Bathilda, for Phaedra held a rare gentleness in her station. She did not raise her voice, nor did she demand. Instead, she listened. Bathilda often felt that the castle itself had taken on its mistress's nature, open, warm, safe. And she thought of Zephyr too, the knight who walked not for glory but for the simple rhythm of his steps. He would already be near the castle now, perhaps pausing to watch the stars, perhaps listening to the quiet river. Bathilda liked the thought of the three of them gathering, each carrying their own kind of stillness, blending them together into something even more soothing. The road grew narrower as it approached the castle, lined with hedges that brushed against her cloak. Fireflies lifted lazily into the air, their golden lights blinking softly, like candles floating free. Bathilda watched them drift, moving with no urgency, simply rising and falling as the night carried them. Their glow reminded her of the lanterns she would soon see glowing from the castle towers. When she reached the final curve, she stopped to look. The castle stood before her now, pale and luminous in the moonlight. Its rounded towers looked less like weapons and more like arms reaching upward in offering. Windows glowed with steady warmth, not harsh but soft, as though each one held a story or a song waiting quietly inside. Bathilda's heart softened further at the sight, and she drew in another slow, deep breath, letting it out with a sigh that matched the calm of the land itself. She approached the gates with her basket cradled close. The guards, as always, greeted her with quiet nods, their spears lowered but never raised. They knew Bathilda well, and more than that, they trusted her presence. She carried not only herbs, but the feeling of peace, as though her very steps soothed the stones she walked upon. Within the gates, she could already sense the warmth of the fire burning in the great hall. The air smelled faintly of wood smoke and something sweeter, perhaps the bread Phaedra had set earlier to bake. Bathilda closed her eyes briefly, letting the scents wrap around her. She imagined the hearth, the flickering firelight against stone, the low voices of friends greeting one another. Her walk was nearly finished, yet it had not felt long. The journey itself had been a rest, each step falling into harmony with the quiet night. And as she crossed the final stretch toward the castle door, Bathilda felt as though the stars themselves leaned lower, watching with quiet approval as three hearts drew closer together, ready to share the peace of a single night. Chapter 4. The Fire in the Hall. The great hall of the castle was not built to impress with its size, though it was spacious, nor to dazzle with its ornaments, though it held fine carvings along its beams. Instead, it was designed to comfort. Its stones held warmth even in the coldest months. Its windows opened wide to let in the summer breeze, and at its center always burned a fire that never failed to ease the spirit. On this night, the hearth glowed bright, the flames reaching upward in slow, steady movements, as though they, too, were in no hurry. Lady Phaedra sat near the fire, her posture graceful yet relaxed. She had placed a thick woolen blanket across the arm of her chair, and her hand rested gently against the carved wood. The warmth of the flames brushed against her cheeks, soft and steady, carrying the faint scent of oak logs. She found comfort not only in the fire itself, but in the way its light painted the walls, sending golden flickers across the stone, making the whole hall feel alive with a gentle heartbeat. She listened. The castle was never noisy, but even its softest sounds brought her peace. From somewhere deeper within, she could hear the faint rush of wind moving through a high tower window. From above, a door creaked lightly on its hinges before settling again. And closest of all was the crackle of the fire, steady and low, the sound blending with the occasional sigh of the chimney. These were not disturbances but companions, each one reminding her that the castle was not empty but gently breathing around her. Upon the table near her rested a clay pot, half filled with water that would soon be used for tea. Next to it were 2 cups of simple design, waiting for hands to wrap around them. Phaedra's eyes softened as she thought of Bathilda, walking slowly from her cottage, basket of herbs swaying at her side. She imagined the moment the herbs would touch the steaming water, filling the hall with their fragrance, lavender rising first, then chamomile, then the cooling trace of mint. Her thoughts drifted also to Zephyr, who by now would be near the gates, his boots carrying him at that unhurried pace he always kept. She could picture him pausing to look at the stars, perhaps running his hand along the old stone wall as though greeting it. Phaedra cherished this about him, that he never rushed the night, never tried to bend time faster, but accepted each step, each breath, as enough. She turned her gaze toward the long table that stretched across the hall. Upon it sat a loaf of bread, still warm, covered with a folded cloth. A bowl of butter rested nearby, and a plate of small fruits, apples, pears, and clusters of grapes. It was a simple spread, yet Phaedra believed that simplicity was its own kind of feast. What mattered was not abundance, but the comfort of sharing what one had. The fire brightened suddenly, a log shifting with a low crack, Sparks lifted into the air for a moment, then faded as quickly as they rose. Phaedra smiled faintly at the sight. There was a rhythm to the fire's movements, almost like breathing. She leaned back in her chair, letting the warmth fold around her, her eyelids lowering just slightly, though not from weariness. Rather, it was the kind of heaviness that came from peace, when every muscle in the body loosened and no thought pressed for attention. Above her, the tall windows revealed the night sky. The moon had risen higher now, casting silver beams across the stone floor. The contrast of silver and gold, moonlight and firelight, made the hall seem caught between two worlds, both equally gentle. The flicker of the flames was lively, always shifting, while the moon's glow was steady, holding everything in a calm embrace. Together, they filled the room with a balance that Phaedra found endlessly soothing. Her thoughts drifted again, not forward or backward, but sideways, as though carried by a gentle stream. She thought of the days she had spent here in quiet solitude, evenings where no guest had come, when she had sat by the fire alone and still found contentment. She thought too of nights filled with laughter, when travelers had shared stories in low voices, their words carrying warmth across the long table. Each memory, whether of stillness or of company, seemed folded into the stones of the hall, as though the castle itself remembered. Soon, she knew, Bathilda's knock would sound at the door, soft but sure, the knock of one who never rushed. And soon after, Zephyr's footsteps would echo across the corridor, slow and even. She felt no need to rise, no urgency to prepare further. Everything was already as it should be. The bread waiting, the cups ready, the fire alive. She reached for the clay pot, lifting it with both hands, and poured the water into the kettle by the fire. The sound of the stream striking metal was soft but steady, filling the hall with yet another layer of calm music. She set it carefully among the coals, listening as the heat began to stir within it. For a time, she simply watched the flames. They licked gently around the kettle, their edges glowing white at the hottest points, their centers deep orange, their tips a flicker of blue. Phaedra found herself breathing in rhythm with the fire. Inhale as the flames leaned upward, exhale as they sank back down. It was a quiet dance, endlessly repeating, endlessly calming. From somewhere beyond the door, she heard the faintest echo. Footsteps, slow and steady. Perhaps Zephyr had arrived, or perhaps it was only the sound of wind against the stones. Either way, the hall felt no different, for its stillness was unbroken, its calm unshaken. She leaned back once more, pulling the blanket gently across her lap. The firelight shimmered against the folds of fabric, casting long shadows that rose and fell with the flames. Above, the moonlight traced its own path across the floor, meeting the shadows and softening them. The hall was ready, the castle was ready, and Phaedra, wrapped in the quiet embrace of fire and stone, waited with patience that knew no measure of time. This was how evenings began in Evandale, not with noise, not with urgency, but with stillness that seemed to deepen the longer one rested within it. A stillness that prepared the heart to welcome warmth, to welcome company, to welcome the long, gentle unfolding of night. Chapter 5. A Shared Table. The kettle had begun to hum softly, a low and steady sound that blended with the fire's crackle. Lady Phaedra sat quietly, her blanket folded across her lap, when the expected sound reached her ears, a gentle knock upon the great wooden door. It was not loud nor hurried, but rather deliberate, 3 soft taps that seemed to match the heartbeat of the night. She rose with unhurried grace and crossed the stone floor, her slippers making almost no sound as they touched the flagstones. When she drew open the door, the cool night air drifted in, carrying with it the scent of grass and pine. Standing there was Bathilda, her basket in hand, filled with the herbs she had gathered with patient care. The silver of her hair gleamed beneath the moonlight, and her smile was as calm as the stars above. "Come in," Phaedra whispered, her voice no louder than the fire. Bathilda stepped inside, her cloak brushing softly as she moved. She placed the basket upon the long table, and together they began to lay out its treasures. Lavender, dried in small bundles tied with twine. Chamomile flowers, pale and delicate. A sprig of rosemary, and leaves of mint still cool with evening dew. Phaedra breathed in the mingled scents, her shoulders sinking with ease. "Your herbs always bring the night to rest more gently," she said, and Bathilda smiled, her eyes half closed as if in agreement with the thought. Not long after, another sound joined the quiet. Footsteps echoed through the corridor beyond the door, measured and steady. The door creaked again, and there stood Sir Zephyr, his cloak folded neatly over his arm, the polished metal of his armor catching the firelight. He bowed his head slightly, though his eyes were bright with the kind of warmth that needed no words. "Welcome, Zephyr," Phaedra said softly, and he stepped inside. The door closed once more, sealing the 3 of them in the glow of fire and moonlight. The table was simple yet inviting. Bread still warm beneath its cloth, butter smooth and pale, grapes shining in the fire's reflection. Zephyr set his gloves aside, and Bathilda took a small knife to cut the bread into slices. The sound was soft, the crust crackling gently before yielding to the tender inside. She placed a piece upon a wooden plate, spreading butter with slow care, and passed it to Zephyr. They ate quietly, each bite unhurried. The taste was familiar, comforting, as though it carried with it not just flavor but memory. Fields of golden grain swaying in the breeze, cows lowing gently in the meadow, grapevines climbing their steady paths toward the sun. The meal was not grand, yet in its simplicity, it felt whole. The kettle's song grew stronger, and Phaedra rose to pour the water into a clay pot lined with Bathilda's herbs. The steam lifted slowly, filling the hall with fragrance. Lavender drifted first, calm and floral, followed by the sweetness of chamomile. Mint rose sharp and cool before settling into gentleness. The air thickened with comfort, as though the very walls had been draped in peace. She poured 3 cups, each warm to the touch, and placed them upon the table. They wrapped their hands around the clay, letting the heat seep into their palms, holding the cups not for thirst alone, but for the simple reassurance of warmth shared. They did not rush to speak. Instead, they sat in silence for a time, the fire crackling, the wind moving softly through the chimney, the moon casting its silver upon the stone. The silence was not empty. It was full, like the hush of a lullaby that needs no words. At last, Zephyr spoke, his voice deep but unhurried. "I walked tonight by the river," he said. The water carried the reflection of the stars, so bright it seemed the heavens had been laid upon the earth. I thought for a while that if I stepped carefully enough, I might walk upon them. Bathilda smiled, her eyes glimmering like the firelight. The river has always carried the sky in its arms. Perhaps it knows that the stars, too, need a place to rest. Phaedra listened, her heart quiet, her mind drifting like a leaf upon a gentle stream. Words in this hall were never hurried, never pressed to fill the air. They rose when they wished, drifted softly, and settled like feathers upon the table. They sipped their tea slow and steady. Each swallow seemed to warm them from within, spreading like fire through their chests, loosening every breath, calming every thought. When the bread was finished and the tea half drunk, Zephyr leaned back, his eyes on the flames. "This castle," he said softly, "always feels as though it was not built but born. The stones do not carry the weight of work, but the ease of something placed gently, like a gift. Perhaps it rose not by hands, but by the will of the night itself." Bathilda nodded, her silver hair shining in the fire's glow. "It is said the stars laid it here," she murmured, "and if one listens closely, one can almost hear them still, whispering in the stones." The three fell silent again, letting the thought drift among them like smoke. The fire cracked, the kettle hummed, and outside the wind moved softly through the branches of trees. Time did not seem to matter within these walls. Each moment stretched and deepened, becoming not something to be measured but something to be savored. Phaedra folded her hands, her eyes half closed. She thought of how rare it was to find such stillness, and yet here, it was always near, waiting like an old friend. The castle asked for nothing, demanded nothing. It simply offered itself, a place where one could sit, breathe, and be. Bathilda reached for her cup again, lifting it slowly. "Drink," she said softly, almost like a lullaby. "Let the herbs quiet the night inside you." They drank together, their movements slow, their breaths deep. The tea wrapped around them like the blanket on Phaedra's lap, weaving calm into every corner of their beings. The table, the fire, the friends, it was all enough. It was more than enough. It was peace itself, poured out like tea, shared like bread, glowing like flame. And so the night deepened, not with noise or urgency, but with gentleness. The hall seemed to lean closer, the stones holding their warmth, the moonlight softening across the floor. The three sat together, safe within the castle built in a single night, letting time drift as softly as the wind beyond the door. Chapter 6. The Gentle Wind. The night deepened, though it did not grow heavy. Instead, it stretched itself wide and calm, as though the sky had taken a long, slow breath. Beyond the castle walls, the wind had risen, not fierce or restless, but steady and kind, a companion to the fire that glowed within. It moved across the meadows in long sighs, bending the tall grasses with care, carrying the sense of earth and pine through the quiet air. Within the hall, Phaedra, Bathilda, and Zephyr felt the gentle presence of that wind even before they heard it. The shutters rattled softly in their hinges, a low murmur like the voice of an old friend at the door. Through the tall windows, the curtains shifted, stirring as if to remind them that the world outside was alive and breathing too. Phaedra rose slowly, drawing her cloak about her shoulders, and moved to the nearest window. She set her hand upon the cool stone ledge and looked outward. The meadow lay bathed in silver light, each blade of grass shining as though brushed with frost. Trees stood along the horizon, their leaves whispering softly as the wind passed through them. The moon was high now, round and calm, its light pouring over the land like milk spilling gently from a cup. Zephyr joined her at the window, his presence quiet, his steps unhurried. He leaned upon the sill, gazing outward with eyes that always seemed to look not only at the world, but into it. "The wind moves gently tonight," he murmured, his voice deep and low. "It carries no storm, no restlessness, only calm, as though it wishes to cradle the kingdom in its arms." Phaedra nodded. "It feels like a lullaby sung by the earth itself." Bathilda, still seated at the table, closed her eyes and tilted her head. She could hear it, the long sighs of air threading through the trees, the faint rustle of grasses, the soft hum as it passed along the stones of the castle. To her, the wind was not a thing to be braved but a gift, carrying with it stories of places beyond sight. She spoke, her voice soft, almost lost within the crackle of the fire. "When I was a child, I was told that every breeze carries a memory. The gentle ones are the oldest, for they have had time to grow calm. They remember fields and rivers and the songs of birds. They come to us, not to trouble us, but to remind us that the world is wide, and yet always kind." The three sat in quiet agreement, the thought settling upon them like the weight of a quilt. The kettle upon the fire gave a soft sigh of steam, rising into the air like a cloud drifting lazily across the sky. Zephyr turned from the window and returned to the table, his cloak brushing lightly behind him. He took his seat once more, his hands folding around his cup of tea, though it had cooled now. "The wind," he said slowly, "is like a knight that carries no sword, protects in another way, by reminding us that we are never alone. Even when silence surrounds us, it speaks." Bathilda opened her eyes, her gaze calm and steady, and in its voice, she said, "We are reminded to slow ourselves, to move as it does, neither hurried nor still, but always gentle." Phaedra returned to her chair, her cloak still wrapped around her shoulders. She drew the blanket once again across her lap, and the firelight flickered over her face. "There is a rhythm to all things," she whispered. "The fire, the river, the wind. And when we listen, truly listen, we find our own rhythm again." The hall fell into silence, though it was not empty silence. It was filled with the sound of the wind threading through the windows, the fire sighing in the hearth, the steady breathing of three friends who needed no more than this. Time drifted gently. The bread upon the table had been eaten, the cups nearly drained. Yet none of them felt the need to rise, for the hall seemed to have gathered them in, holding them as carefully as the wind held the meadow. Zephyr's gaze turned to the flames, their gold and orange weaving together like threads of a tapestry. He spoke again, though his voice was softer now, almost like a dream. "When I walk the hills, I feel the wind upon my face, and it tells me stories, not in words, but in touch. Tells me of the sea I have never seen, of mountains I have never climbed. And yet, even though I have not been there, the wind carries those places to me. It lets me belong to them, even from afar." Bathilda smiled faintly, her fingers brushing the rim of her cup. "It is the way of the wind to remind us that distance is never so far, that every place, every corner of the earth is connected, and that we are part of it all, not apart from it." Phaedra's eyes softened. "And in that truth," she said, "there is no loneliness." Their words faded into the stillness, and the three of them allowed the thought to settle deep within. The hall grew quieter still, until it seemed that only the wind's soft song remained. It lulled them gently, like the slow rocking of a cradle, urging the heart to ease, the mind to rest. Bathilda stood at last, moving toward the window. She laid her hand upon the cool stone as Phaedra had done, feeling the faint vibration of the night air against her skin. "It is good," she said softly, "to be reminded that we are part of something endless, that even when our thoughts grow small and troubled, the world beyond us is wide and always gentle." Zephyr and Phaedra joined her, standing together by the tall window. The three looked outward, across the meadow that stretched beneath the moonlight, the grasses bending, the trees swaying, the river glimmering faintly in the distance. The wind touched their faces, cool and light, and for a moment it felt as though the whole world had leaned in to kiss their cheeks. It was not urgent, not forceful, only soft, like a mother's hand brushing back a strand of hair, or a lullaby hummed without words. They lingered there, letting the breeze carry away all weight, all worry. Their thoughts slowed until they felt no need for them at all. The night itself was enough, and when they returned at last to the table, wrapping themselves once more in firelight and blankets, the hall seemed even warmer, as though the castle had listened to and joined in the calm. The wind continued to sing beyond the walls, low and steady, guiding the night onward, carrying them deeper into peace. Chapter 7, Dreams by the Fire. The night had grown deep, though within the castle the fire still glowed strong. Its light softened the edges of the hall, painting the stones in gold and bronze, while the moonlight drifting through the windows added its gentle silver. The balance of these lights, the warm and the cool, the flickering and the steady, wrapped the space in a quiet harmony. Lady Phaedra, Bathilda, and Zephyr had settled into an easy silence, their cups emptied, their bread eaten, their thoughts unhurried. The fire no longer roared. It murmured instead, a steady breath that seemed to fall into rhythm with their own. In that softened stillness, their minds began to wander, not outward into the world, but inward, into the quiet chambers of imagination where dreams take shape. Phaedra leaned back in her chair, the blanket still across her lap, her eyes half closed. The fire's glow reflected in her gaze, though her thoughts had already begun to drift beyond the hall. She imagined herself walking through the castle gardens, though she had not left her chair. In her mind, the hedges glistened with dew, the roses unfurled slowly beneath the moonlight, and the fountain whispered as water traced its endless curve. She walked there barefoot, the grass cool beneath her feet, the air thick with the scent of blossoms. It was a dream, perhaps, yet it felt as real as the blanket's weight against her knees. Bathilda, too, drifted. Her chin rested lightly upon her hand, her eyes closed. She felt herself sitting once more in her cottage, though not as it was in daylight. In her dream, the walls glowed with lanterns. The shelves seemed endless, filled with jars of herbs that shimmered faintly as though touched by starlight. She brewed tea not from flowers alone, but from stars themselves, plucked carefully and steeped in water that glowed pale blue. When she lifted the cup to her lips in this dream, the taste was cool and sweet, like rain upon the tongue, and with it came a feeling of boundless rest. Zephyr's thoughts wandered differently. He sat with his back straight, his hands resting calmly on his knees, his eyes open but unfocused, watching the fire without truly seeing it. His dream was not of gardens or cottages, but of paths. In his mind, he walked along a hilltop, the sky wide above him, the land rolling endlessly below. There was no need for destination. The path itself was enough. The wind whispered along the grasses, brushing against his armor with the gentlest touch, and each step carried him deeper into stillness. He dreamed of walking forever, and in that endless walk, there was peace. The fire crackled, as though in agreement with their dreams, sparks rising briefly before fading into the air. The hall seemed to grow quieter still, the weight of silence thick but soothing, like the fold of heavy curtains. Phaedra stirred first, opening her eyes though she did not fully return. "There are nights," she whispered, her voice low and steady, "when the fire seems to carry us into dreams before we sleep, as though it wishes to remind us that rest begins not when the body lies down, but when the heart loosens." Bathilda's lips curved faintly. She did not open her eyes, but she replied in a tone soft as breath. "The fire is an old teacher. It shows us that everything has rhythm, rising, falling, burning, fading. And in watching it, we remember our own rhythm." Zephyr inclined his head, his gaze still upon the flames. "A knight is taught to watch for signs of danger in every shadow. But here I watch shadows only to see how they dance. I learn again that not all watching is guarding. Sometimes it is simply seeing." The three fell silent again, but their silence was no emptiness. It was full of the gentle hum of fire, the sigh of wind through the shutters, the faint shifting of the castle as its stones settled deeper into the night. Time slipped by unnoticed, as though it too had chosen to rest. Phaedra's hand brushed the blanket, smoothing its folds. Her mind wandered once more, and this time she imagined herself standing upon the castle's highest tower. In her dream, the wind wrapped around her shoulders like a shawl. The stars shimmered close enough to touch, and the moon itself seemed to lean down, its glow brushing her cheeks like a kiss. She felt no weight of duty, no thought of tomorrow, only the deep, endless now. Bathilda's breath slowed, and her dream deepened. She saw herself walking through a meadow where the herbs she loved grew taller than she. Lavender brushed her shoulders, chamomile flowers nodded gently in the breeze. Mint spread across the ground in a soft carpet. The air was alive with fragrance, and every step seemed to release more calm into her being. It was a garden beyond time, where nothing wilted, nothing hurried. Everything simply was. Zephyr's dream path stretched onward, yet he did not grow weary. With each step, he felt lighter, as though the earth itself carried him. The horizon shifted, not to urge him forward, but to open itself in welcome. He walked not to arrive, but to remain, and in remaining, he felt whole. The fire softened further, its flames lower now, its light deeper. It no longer flickered with energy, but glowed with a steady, quiet warmth, like the steady beat of a heart at rest. Phaedra's eyes closed fully at last, though her lips still held the faint trace of a smile. Bathilda's head tilted gently to the side, her breathing slow, her body loose. Zephyr did not close his eyes, yet his gaze had grown so soft that he seemed as much in dream as in waking. The hall, the fire, the night, all of it wrapped around them like a lullaby sung without words. They did not resist it. They did not need to. For here, in the castle built in a single night, rest came not as an end, but as a gift that unfolded gently, dream by dream, breath by breath. And so they sat together, neither fully awake nor fully asleep, drifting in that space between, where the heart is quiet and the mind floats free. The castle listened, the wind hummed, the fire breathed, and the night, deep and kind, carried them onward. Chapter 8. The Moonlit Tower. The castle held many chambers and quiet halls, yet none were as beloved by Lady Phaedra as the tower that rose above them all. It was a place not of defense, nor of watchfulness, but of stillness and light. Its steps spiraled upward in gentle curves, each one worn smooth by years of soft passage, and at its crown, a balcony opened to the night sky. When the fire in the hall had quieted to a low glow, and their teacups had long been emptied, Phaedra rose from her chair. The blanket slipped gently from her lap, and she drew her cloak once more about her shoulders. Her eyes lingered on Bathilda and Zephyr, who sat still in the peace of dreams by the fire, but after a moment, she spoke in a tone that did not disturb the silence. "Come," she said softly. "The tower waits." Bathilda lifted her head, her silver hair glimmering in the firelight. Zephyr stirred as well, his steady gaze returning from whatever horizon his thoughts had wandered. Without question, without haste, they rose together. Their movements were unhurried, each step across the stone floor carrying the same rhythm as their breathing. They crossed the hall and entered the stairwell, where the walls curved close and cool. The air was still, yet faintly fragrant, as though it held the memory of herbs carried here long ago. Their footsteps echoed softly, though the sound was gentle, blending with the hush of the night. Step by step they ascended. The spiral carried them upward, not with strain, but with a slow ease, as though the climb itself were a kind of meditation. Each turn revealed nothing more than the next stretch of stone. Yet with every step the air grew lighter, as though touched by the sky. At last they emerged into the open. The tower's crown stretched outward, a stone balcony ringed with carved balustrades. Above them, the sky spread wide and endless, the moon high and round, its light falling like silver rain upon the land. Stars shimmered in their countless numbers, steady and calm, not hurried in their shining. The three stood together at the edge, the breeze brushing gently across their faces. From here, the kingdom of Everendale lay open before them. Meadows glowed faintly in the moonlight, rivers glimmered like long ribbons of glass, forests swayed softly in the steady wind. The village rested below, windows glowing faintly with the last of their fires, and beyond it all, hills rolled like waves frozen in quiet motion. Phaedra placed her hand upon the stone, her eyes wide but soft. "Here," she whispered, "the world feels both endless and near, as though the stars are close enough to hold, yet the earth stretches forever." Bathilda drew her cloak tighter, though not from cold. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and steady. "It is said that this tower was the first part of the castle to appear, when it was born in a single night. The stars placed it here so that we might never forget to look upward, and never forget that we belong to something greater than ourselves." Zephyr leaned against the balustrade, his gaze sweeping the horizon. His armor glowed faintly, touched by silver light. A knight is often told that his duty is to guard the land. But when I stand here, I see that the land guards us. The hills cradle us, the rivers nourish us, the sky covers us. There is nothing to fight, for we are already held. The wind moved softly across the tower, carrying the scent of grass and river water. It brushed against their cloaks, lifted their hair, and seemed to hum in low tones as it passed. It was neither restless nor sharp, but steady, like a hand smoothing wrinkles from cloth. For a time, none of them spoke. They simply stood in the silver wash of the moon, letting its glow seep into their skin, their bones, their breath. The silence here was not empty but vast, as though it contained the whole of the night. Phaedra closed her eyes, and in her mind she felt the stars moving slowly overhead, steady in their patterns, never hurried, never lost. She thought of the villagers sleeping below, safe in their cottages, wrapped in blankets, breathing in rhythm with the quiet of the land. She thought of the fire still glowing faintly in the hall, waiting for their return, carrying warmth into the stones of the castle. Bathilda rested her hands upon the balustrade, her fingers tracing the worn carvings. She imagined the herbs in her basket, still faintly fragrant even now, their roots deep in the earth, their leaves brushing in the wind. She thought of how everything, whether great as the stars or small as a leaf, seemed woven together in this single endless lullaby. Zephyr lifted his eyes to the horizon, where the hills met the sky. He thought of his endless paths, the walks he loved to take without destination. From here, he saw that every path was part of one greater whole, each hill leading to another, each river joining another stream. It was enough simply to walk, for walking itself was belonging. The moon brightened, or perhaps it only seemed so, as their eyes grew softer and slower. Its light filled the tower, casting long shadows that moved gently with the wind. The stars above held their places, shining without effort, without thought. The world seemed to pause here, not to stop, but to rest. Bathilda's voice came at last, quiet and steady. This tower is not for watching alone. It is for remembering that peace is not far, but always near, waiting within us, waiting around us. Phaedra opened her eyes and nodded faintly. Yes, and in remembering, we rest. Zephyr's lips curved in a small smile. Then let us rest in the sight of the stars, as the castle rests in the sight of the moon. And so they did. They stood together in the moonlit tower, their breaths slow, their bodies loose, their thoughts drifting like leaves upon a stream. They needed no words, no stories. The night itself was story enough, its pages written in silver and shadow, its chapters turned by the gentle hand of the wind. The castle beneath them held steady, strong yet soft, its stones warmed by fire, cooled by air, washed in light. The land stretched outward, patient and still, and above, the sky watched, its stars humming their silent hymn. In the tower built by the stars, the three friends let themselves be quiet, and in that quiet they found all they needed. Chapter 9. The Village Asleep. The night deepened in Everendale, yet it did not grow heavy. It softened. The stars held their steady watch above. The moon poured her silver light gently across rooftops and fields, and the world seemed to sigh into stillness. From the high balcony of the tower, Lady Phaedra, wise Bathilda, and gentle Zephyr looked down upon the quiet village nestled close to the castle's walls. The village was small, but it seemed endless in its peace. Narrow lanes curved like streams between cottages with thatched roofs. Lanterns had been extinguished one by one, until only a few glows remained in windows where candles burned low, keeping faint watch over sleepers within. The air carried the soft scent of hearth smoke mixed with the sweetness of hay, and the sound of an owl's low call drifted through the silence, unhurried and calm. The three friends descended slowly from the tower, their steps measured, their minds eased by the sky's embrace. The spiral stairs welcomed them down again, until at last they stepped into the hall, where the fire had sunk to embers. The flames no longer leapt, but glowed steadily, their red light casting warm shadows against the stone. Phaedra smiled faintly, her hand brushing the table as though in gratitude for its patience. "The village sleeps," she murmured. "Let us walk among them, not to disturb, but to share in their rest." Bathilda gathered her cloak, the herbs in her pouch releasing a gentle fragrance of lavender and thyme. "A village asleep is as sacred as a temple," she said softly. Each dream a prayer, each breath a hymn. Zephyr inclined his head. Then let us be pilgrims, wandering in silence. Together, they left the castle by its wide wooden gates. The doors opened without groan or clamor, for the hinges had been cared for with oil and patience. Outside, the night air embraced them gently, cool but never cold. The grass at the foot of the walls was soft beneath their boots, and the earth itself seemed to hum with stillness. They entered the first lane of the village, where cottages stood close together, their walls of stone and timber pale beneath the moon. Thatched roofs sloped gently, like blankets drawn over the homes. Smoke curled faintly from one or two chimneys, not strong but lingering, as if keeping watch over the sleepers inside. A dog stirred near a doorstep, lifting its head only long enough to recognize familiar figures. With a soft sigh, it settled back down, returning to dreams. Somewhere deeper in the village, a cow lowed gently in its sleep, a sound more like a whisper than a call. The entire village seemed to dream together, each sound blending into one soft rhythm. Phaedra paused near a cottage window, where faint candlelight still flickered. Through the glass, she saw the shadow of a woman bent over her spinning wheel, her head nodding slowly with drowsiness. The thread glowed faintly in the light, unwinding as gently as the night itself. Even the weary find rest, Phaedra murmured. The night always waits for us, patiently. Bathilda touched the wooden frame of the window with care, her hand leaving no mark. Dreams will carry her where waking cannot, she said, her voice as steady as the stars. They moved on, passing another home where soft laughter drifted from within. A child, not yet fully asleep, whispered stories to a sibling, their voices hushed as though they already belonged to the dream world. The sound made Zephyr's lips curve with peace. What nights guard better than laughter in the night? He asked softly. This is the treasure we keep. Further along, they reached the square of the village, a place where during the day there was bustle and trade, where bakers and blacksmiths, farmers and children filled the air with movement. But now, beneath the moon, it was still. The fountain at the center trickled softly, its water catching silver light. Benches stood empty, yet not lonely, for the night itself kept them company. The three friends sat upon one of the benches, their bodies sinking into the smooth wood. They breathed together, their silence shared with the still square, as though they too were part of its rest. The fountain's quiet song lulled their thoughts into softness. Bathilda closed her eyes. The village dreams, and so the kingdom dreams. All are connected. All are one circle of breath. Phaedra let her gaze drift upward to the rooftops. Even the walls of stone seem to sleep, she said gently. Yet their silence is not emptiness. It is safety. They hold the dreams within. Zephyr leaned back, his armor faintly glowing in the moonlight. This peace is not fragile. It does not hide from storms, but endures them. It flows deeper than waking hours, for it is woven into the earth itself. They lingered there, breathing in the night. No urgency pressed them, no task called them. The stillness was its own gift, and they accepted it fully. When at last they rose, their steps carried them further through the village, to the far edge where fields stretched outward in pale waves. Crops rustled faintly in the wind, though the stalks were still rooted firmly in place. The smell of grain drifted with the breeze, mingling with the scent of wildflowers that grew freely along the paths. Here, too, the village lived in dreams. Farmers lay in their beds, their work set aside, their breath slow and even. Tools leaned against barn walls, content to rest until morning. Horses shifted softly in their stalls, their tails flicking lazily even in sleep. The whole of the land seemed cradled in unseen hands. Phaedra reached down, brushing her fingers along the tips of the grass. Dew had already begun to form, cool and tender, sparkling faintly in the moonlight. "The night blesses even the smallest things," she whispered. "Each blade of grass is held, each leaf remembered." Bathilda's voice followed, calm and low. "And so too are we." Zephyr gazed outward toward the horizon, where the hills darkened against the starlit sky. "It is enough to walk among the sleeping, to be here, to belong." They stood together at the edge of the village, the fields before them, the cottages behind, and the castle rising faintly in the distance, its tower gleaming like a lantern. The night wrapped itself around them, steady, patient, eternal. For a long while they said nothing. They simply let the stillness carry them, each breath aligning with the breath of the land, each heartbeat slowing to match the rhythm of the night. When at last they turned back toward the castle, their steps were slow, as though reluctant to leave, yet not sorrowful. For they carried the village's peace within them, and knew it would remain, even as dawn would someday rise. Chapter 10. The Dawn's Gentle Promise. The night in Everndale was long, but never lonely. It held within it the quiet strength of stars, the tender glow of the moon, and the stillness of the village at rest. Lady Phaedra, Bathilda the Wise, and Zephyr the Gentle Knight had walked among its lanes, breathed its soft air, and stood in its fields, until their hearts felt full with the weightless gift of peace. Now, as they returned to the castle, the sky itself began its slow transformation. The stars still shimmered, yet their brilliance softened, as though they were withdrawing gently, one by one, into the folds of the heavens. The moon lowered, her silver light dimming into pearl, and upon the eastern edge of the horizon, a faint blush appeared, tender as the first breath of a child. Dawn was not yet here, but its promise had begun. The three friends walked beneath this changing sky, their steps unhurried, their cloaks brushing softly against their sides. The castle welcomed them as they approached, its stones pale against the retreating night. The gates stood open, the torches along the walls glowing faintly, though their flames had grown small in the cool air. Inside, the great hall awaited. The fire upon the hearth had fallen to quiet coals, but those coals glowed with steady warmth, casting a faint red glow across the stones. The scent of smoke lingered, mixed with the faint fragrance of Bathilda's herbs, which had spread gently through the air. They took their places once more near the hearth. None reached for blankets, none reached for tea. They sat simply, their bodies at ease, letting the silence of the hall surround them. The weight of their long wandering had softened into stillness, and their breaths came slow, as though guided by the rhythm of the night's final song. Bathilda spoke first, her voice low, like the last murmur of wind before dawn. "Every night carries a lesson. Tonight's was simple, that peace is not to be found, but to be remembered. It lives in the village asleep, in the tower that watches the stars, in the meadow where we rest. It waits always for us to notice." Phaedra's hands folded in her lap, her fingers relaxed. "Yes, and the castle itself is built not of stone alone, but of peace. It rises because peace holds it, as surely as mortar holds the walls. Without peace, it would crumble. With peace, it endures." Zephyr leaned back, his gaze upon the fire's low glow. A knight may be trained to seek strength in arms and shield, but tonight I have seen strength in gentleness. The village needs no sword, for it is guarded by its own quiet harmony. And we, too, are guarded when we yield to it. The coals shifted softly, a faint crackle sounding as one ember split into two. Their glow flared for a moment, then settled again, steady as the slow pulse of the earth. Outside, the first bird stirred, a single note, tentative yet sure. It was neither loud nor rushed, but soft, a prelude to dawn. The three sat together, listening. More birds joined, their calls overlapping gently, weaving a quiet tapestry of sound. The air within the hall seemed to brighten, though the sun had not yet risen. The promise of morning drifted through the stones, carried on the voices of the waking earth. Bathilda closed her eyes and drew a long breath. Morning does not arrive all at once. It is patient. It teaches us that change need not be sudden to be certain. Phaedra looked toward the high windows of the hall, where the faintest glow began to touch the edges of the glass. The castle will wake soon. The villagers will rise, their fires rekindled, their hands ready for work. Yet this peace will not vanish. It lingers, as the warmth of night lingers in dreams. Zephyr smiled faintly, his armor now dulled from silver to gray as the sky lightened. And we will walk again when the stars return. For peace is not bound to one night alone. It flows through every night, through every dawn, through every step we take. The castle stirred softly around them. Somewhere deep within, a door shifted on its hinges. Far above, the sound of a dove's wings echoed faintly. And outside, the horizon brightened further, its blush deepening into soft gold. The promise of morning grew steady, as gentle as it was inevitable. For a moment, Phaedra leaned her head against Bathilda's shoulder, her hair brushing the elder's cloak. Bathilda rested her hand atop Phaedra's, her touch light but grounding. Zephyr watched them both, his heart quiet, as though he too were cradled by unseen arms. No words were needed. The silence was enough. The castle, the village, the land itself spoke in quiet tones. Rest, breathe, belong. Slowly, the first rays of dawn crept through the windows, touching the stone floor with pale gold. They stretched like fingers, reaching across the hall, warming the shadows. The coals upon the hearth glowed in answer, their red deepening into orange as the new day joined them. Phaedra lifted her gaze, her eyes softened by the light. "The dawn keeps its promise," she said. Bathilda nodded, her lips curving into a serene smile. "It always does." Zephyr exhaled, his breath long and calm. "And so does peace." They sat a little longer, letting the warmth of morning mingle with the coolness of night, until both seemed to weave together into one gentle whole. The castle had not changed. The village had not stirred. Yet the world felt renewed, as though each stone, each leaf, each star, and each breath had been given again. When at last they rose, their movements were slow and unhurried. They did not leave the hall, nor seek another place. They simply stood together in the dawning light, three figures bound not by duty or command, but by quiet companionship. The night had carried them in stillness. The dawn would carry them forward, and in both they were safe. Outside, the sun lifted slowly above the horizon, spilling gold across the hills, painting the meadows with gentle fire. The rivers caught its reflection, shimmering as though strewn with countless gems. The village woke in whispers, doors opening, voices greeting, children stirring with sleepy laughter. The day had begun, but the peace of the night lingered, steady and unbroken. And so, the castle built in a single night remained as it always had. Not merely a fortress, but a sanctuary of calm, a place where every heart that entered might find rest, and every soul might remember that peace is always near. The kingdom breathed together, one slow, steady sigh, as the dawn's gentle promise unfolded.